Ceann Corla. The Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality has done incredible work, cataloguing and making recommendations on a suite of issues that impact on inequity and discrimination concerning gender. I think it's important to note at the outset that this is a discussion about how gender affects individuals and groups in society. It's not a discussion about women and girls. However, the patriarchal nature of our society means that it is women and girls who are most frequently disadvantaged. The Assembly's report is an outline of many of the key matters which are consistently raised in this House, from the needs of people with disabilities to the cost of childcare and harmful and abusive content on social media. Also, it should be noted that on most of the issues there was an overwhelming agreement, with many of the recommendations passing by over 90%. This level of agreement shows that when people are given the time to examine these topics, there is a strong consensus for a fairer society in which public services play a vital role. This report confirmed something to me that I've often said, that most Irish people are social democrats, by which I mean they value the principles of social democracy that strives for a more equitable society and locates the state as the primary actor to help achieve this in conjunction with civil society. This report is basically a manifesto for a living wage, publicly funded childcare, improved conditions for carers, better social protection, home care packages for older people and people with disabilities, and gender balance in politics, public life and in workplaces. This is a clear, independent barometer for this and future governments. It's the yardstick by which actions on equality can be judged. Successive governments have a mixed track record with following up on the recommendations of citizens' assemblies or constitutional conventions. They have helped progress some of our recent social referendums, but equally the findings on economic, social and cultural rights and the extending voting franchises have really been left to individual Oireachtas members to pursue. So we need the government commitment to act on these recommendations and those in previous assemblies. With my remaining time, I want to focus on three of the very many issues raised in the recommendations, and there's loads I'd like to go into. But firstly, childcare. The Assembly recommends that over the next decade we move to a publicly funded, accessible and regulated model of quality, affordable early years and out-of-hours childcare, which will be achieved by increasing the state share of GDP spent on childcare from the current 0.37% of GDP to at least 1% by no later than 2030, in line with the UNICEF target. This funding will make a substantial difference to the hundreds of thousands of families across the country. This is an issue that disproportionately impacts on women who tend to either be childcare professionals or spend more time at home care for children. A SIP2 survey of childcare sector workers released earlier this year showed that 90% of childcare workers struggle to make ends meet, 77% have no work sick pay scheme, and just 10% received maternity leave from their employer. Also, many people, primarily women employed in this, are actively seeking other work. There is a real need to increase the direct state funding to the childcare sector to help improve staff pay and improve working conditions, and to increase affordability for parents. I think that we all know we won't achieve equality in terms of gender until there is a fully accessible childcare system in this country. Next, the Assembly has very strong recommendations regarding domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. It calls for sufficient publicly funded provisions of beds, shelters and accommodation for victims and survivors of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence across the country and their dependents, in line with the Istanbul Convention. I've repeatedly raised this exact point. Under the Istanbul Convention, the state is required to provide one refuge space for every 10,000 people in Ireland. However, we only provide one refuge space per 10,000 women, so 50% less of what is recommended to be the bare minimum. The department seemed content to provide half of that amount of the refuge spaces due to a clause that refers to other supports, but clearly their interpretation is incorrect. The Assembly reinforces the need for the proper number of refuge spaces. Here I am quoting directly from the report. Nearly 99% were in favour of ensuring that there is sufficient housing and accommodation for victims and survivors. The Istanbul Convention recommends one shelter space to every 10,000 people in Ireland. It is unambiguous. We need the government to fulfil our obligations under the Istanbul Convention immediately. A related recommendation calls for a Cabinet Minister with direct responsibility for implementation of a national strategy to prevent and counter domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This reflects the complexity of domestic abuse, which has relevance for the Department of Health and Housing as much as Justice and your own department, Children. It is one of those cross-cutting issues that needs targeted attention, probably driven by a single person. On this point, I'm guided by support organisations and advocates who have repeatedly called for a dedicated minister with reach across all of those departments and agencies with which a survivor may interact, and a Cabinet Standing Committee. We need this leadership to drive the necessary transformative change to provide integrated support on the ground specialists and preventative strategies. I suggest that the new committee looking at these recommendations would focus on this role, which may be Minister of State, I'm not sure, but one whose sole responsibility is driving a far-reaching strategy on domestic and sexual violence. It's also important to say that a number of sub-recommendations on victim support and reforms of our court systems are underway. This is incredibly welcome, but we must still be aware of the considerable barriers that victims and survivors face in even considering reporting these crimes. 2 weeks ago, Rape Crisis Network Ireland revealed that there has been a 22% increase in helpline calls during the pandemic, and that over the past decade, there was a 100% increase in calls. Women, children, men, they're all reaching out. The Assembly's findings are a fresh call to redouble our efforts in response. Thirdly, there are direct recommendations on stereotypes in education and the media, highlighting the need for our education system and media advertising to promote gender diversity. I'm a strong believer in you have to see it to be it. We need to ensure that children and young people have a selection of role models to help them develop. As the Assembly recommends, this means strengthening existing programmes to encourage women into male-dominated careers and developing initiatives to encourage men into female-dominated careers. The latter point is often overlooked, I think, and we probably all know men who would have been incredible nurses or therapists or secretaries, and perhaps would have been if social norms had facilitated them in pursuing those careers. The conclusions on media and advertising are also significant, as this is an incredibly influential area with little oversight. They've called for stronger regulations to promote gender equality and avoid gender discrimination and stereotyping, and take action where discriminatory behaviours occur. This is very relevant when we consider the work of the Why Not Her collective, which I'm sure you heard of, which has shown up that up until recently, you're over 5 times more likely to hear an Irish male artist than an Irish female artist on Irish radio. The movement's monitoring of gender disparity on Irish radio revealed that issue. And even more importantly, I think, than revealing the issue, their work has resulted in some of the stations consciously changing their pattern. So over the past year, for the topmost 20 played songs by Irish artists, some stations have gone from 0% women on the top 20 most played, just to be specific, to over 20%. So we need this kind of trend, to continue. When similar research was conducted in the UK, stations changed their practices and confronted their bias. Some Irish radio stations, like I said, have begun to consciously support Irish women artists, and we need the rest to follow. We need the industry and the government to work together to give these talented Irish artists airplay. Representation matters, I think, and what we see online, on TV, in school books, it really shapes our understanding of the world. For children, it influences career choices. We need to make more opportunities available to more young people. In closing, I'd like to note that this item is being covered today due to the determination of a number of members, mainly, as far as I know, I think Deputy Jennifer Carroll McNeill. The recommendations were published in June, and these matters should have been discussed long before the budget. I'm also calling for the forthcoming new committee on gender equality to have members from all political groupings, given the importance of the matters that it will consider, and I would request that all groups, especially the larger parties, ensure that they have sufficient numbers of male representatives on the committee. As I said, gender does not mean it's just a women and girls issue. There are distinct gender patterns, I think, on our Oireachtas committees at the moment, reflecting those kind of societal stereotypes from the Agriculture and Transport Committee, which only have one female member. There is no female TD on the Agriculture Committee. To the Disability Matters Committee, which has the majority of female members, and it's kind of similar on the Children's Committee. Just in my last few seconds, I suppose, in terms of gender equality in Ireland in general, one of the sad realities is that when we got independence as a country, that's when things really went south for women, for gender equality. I didn't actually mean the pun there, going south, but you know, for most, I can't speak for all women, but I know that for most of the women I know, we're also proud to be Irish and to have that independence. So, you know, it's kind of a horrible feeling when you think about the reality of what happened for us when we got independence. And I think it really is just time to change that. We have the Citizens Assembly report now. What we really require is the political will to change this now, and I really hope that that exists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Cairns. Now we go to Deputy Emer Higgins, sharing